Microphone is up. Okay, I think we're good. I see them both. Okay. All right. There we go. Now they can see it. They can hear it. They can see me. Oh boy. You see me. Can't see you, but you're there. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful morning. I hope God has blessed you this day. I mean, shoot, another day that we're all awake and we're all alive and we're all here. That's another blessed day, right? Even if you're in the future, that means there's been many days blessed from now till then.
Yes.
So we are doing our Bible study today. We are working on Acts 14. I should make sure that I forgot to check my. Sure, I got my Bible set up over here and it's working. It doesn't look right. See, these are the things that I got to do beforehand. I just always forget. It's all right. We'll get there. There we go. That looks better. Now we're ready to bring the Bible into this here, do the real thing. You're not here to see us. You're here to hear the Bible, right? So yeah, we're just going chronologically, verse by verse, through the Bible. We are getting really, really close to when we actually change to another book. This is actually Acts 14, and then we're going to go to James and read, I think, all of James, because it actually falls in between Acts 14 and Acts 15 chronologically, as it were. So that's how we do it. That's what we do. It's been Acts for a long time because that's just kind of how it lands and how it works out. But yeah, we'll do Acts 14, then we're going to move to the book of James, and then we'll come back to Acts after that. We also have our Thursday discipleship. So if this is your first time watching, join us for Thursday mornings where we do a discipleship study, just kind of going through what is it? What does a Christian believe? What does it actually mean? What does the Bible tell us? With lots of scripture references to back it up. We're actually on lesson 9, so you can catch up if you want. Go check out the playlist, and you'll see in the description there's a link to the study guide for lesson 9, so you can read ahead and be prepared. And maybe if you have questions or if you have thoughts, right, you can have those, post those. I always forget to say it. I never say it at the beginning, but I'll say it now because you should is when you're supposed to say it, right? If you are new here, subscribe to the channel, share it, send some comments our way, good or bad, I don't care. Send them in. Um, we're listening. Otherwise, I think I've rambled enough. I think it's time to get onto the Bible, right?
Works for me. I
All
will
right.
say, um, I saw a post last night that I tried spending time to verify it, but something talks about rebuilding the third temple. Um, you know,
They're working on that.
for whatever,
I know they have been for a while,
whatever,
right?
whatever that means. If they want to kick things off, who am I to say no?
Right. We can't get to the next step without it. So yeah, bring it on. Bring it on.
Let's.
I don't know how long between the building of the third temple and everything happens, but yeah, you can't have Jesus's second coming without that third temple. So it's important. I
It
know
is.
they've been working on that red heifer for like a decade. I've been hearing reports and stories of that for quite some time. So,
So about they got three of them
all
that
right.
are getting to be old enough.
Yep, that's the tricky part too. Is it's because this not to diverge too much, but the red heifer is needed to sacrifice to consecrate the tools for the temple, um, to consecrate the implements of the temple, from what I understand, and it has to be without blemish, meaning it has to
Yep.
be completely red. There can be no white hair. There can be no scars. There can be no, I think, warts. Right? It has to literally be a perfect calf, and it has to be the right
Yep.
age for it to be sacrificed. And then they also have the temple built. So there's that too. But hey,
I'm pretty sure
God can
there's
do amazing things.
some land disputes over there
Just a
about where
small
the
one,
temple
just a
is.
real small one.
Something.
Yep,
I don't
just
know.
something they got to work out. I'm sure they'll figure it out though. Yep, God has a way, right? I mean, there's only been one nation in the history of the world that was completely wiped out and then brought back. So, um, yeah, God's got a way. He's got a way to do it.
Sure does.
All right, we'll get ourselves over to Acts here. Oh, my camera's not following me. Come on, camera. There we go. I'm gonna make sure I'm not just seeing half my face. Not that it matters. Probably don't need my face at all. Um, So, Acts 14, verse 1. We're following Paul here. This is Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey. They just lost John Mark, in Acts 13 as they traveled to the region that is known as Galatia. Right. So later, when we get the book of Galatians, that is to not just one church; it's actually to these multiple churches. These areas we talk about here: Iconia, Lystra, Derbe. These are the churches of Galatia. It is a region. And so they spend some time here. Actually, even when in verse 3, when it says, they remained for a long time, I think the total time in this area is believed to be about 3 or 4 years that they were doing this. So maybe that was their whole missionary journey, or maybe that was just this part. Either way, they were there for quite some time. This was not just a short little fly in, fly out, they weren't just, covering one Sunday and then moving on. And to show the boldness of that as we go through here, you're gonna see what happens very early on, and yet they don't flee. So that's why, again, the boldness of preaching the gospel, and also a lesson for us who in our day we don't have anything like they did in having to share the gospel with people, to preach the gospel, but at the same time we still will face some sort of persecutions. You will, for sharing it. So anyway, hopefully this can be an encouragement to all of us.
Yes.
So verse 14, chapter 1, or chapter 14, verse 1. Let me get this right. Now at Iconium, they entered together into the Jewish synagogue and spoke in such a way that a great number of both Jews and Greeks believed. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their mind against the brothers. So they remained for a long time, speaking boldly for the Lord, who bore witness to the word of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be done by their hands. Like that was pointed out, that not typical of what we do in our society nowadays, right? When a great stirring up of poisoning of their minds against the brothers happens, what did they do? They ran. No, they remained for a long time, right? So they got converts right off the bat. They always go to the synagogue first when there is one. You'll see that later, that we kind of can infer that one of these other cities there isn't a synagogue because they don't start there. But otherwise, they always start at the synagogue first, to the Jew first, then the Gentile, and then converted a lot of people. So the Gentiles that were the Greeks that were converted, these would be the Greek proselytes. These would be the Greeks who have converted to Judaism. So they got them right away, but then they stirred up a bunch of people against them. And over and over and over, Luke, writing this gospel, he points out constantly that it was never the Christians that were causing the trouble, and it was never the Romans that were causing the trouble. It was always the Jews causing the trouble. So yeah, they spoke boldly for the Lord, bear witness, did signs and wonders. But the people of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews and some with the apostles. And when an attempt was made by both Gentiles and Jews with their rulers to mistreat them and stone them, I always think that seems to be such light language. We're going to mistreat them by stoning them to death. They learned of it and fled to Lystra and Derbe, cities of Laconia and the surrounding country. Now, these cities were of the same region, but I think it's like 20 or 40 miles to Lystra, and it's like another 40 or 60 to Derbe. Like these aren't they're not like right next to each other, right? And so when you're like, oh yeah, we're gonna flee, I mean that's like we're talking a week journey or 2 week journey at least, if not more, because this is pretty mountainous country too. So they traveled though. As soon as someone tipped them off that they were in danger, someone said, hey, they're coming for you, and so they realized that okay, this is too much. We better get out of here, right? So they went to the surrounding country and they continued to preach the gospel. Now at Lystra, there was a man sitting who could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked, right? Make sure you get that, just in case you missed it, right? He could not use his feet. He was crippled from birth and had never walked. Just to make sure there's no like, oh no, he just had a bad ankle, right? He listened to Paul speaking, and Paul, looking intently at him and seeing that he had faith to be made well, said in a loud voice, stand upright on your feet. And he sprang up and began to walk. And began walking. There's lessons to be had in this too, not just physical but spiritual, right? God speaks to us in that way too. Stand up on your feet. And did the guy say, let me pray about it? Let me go find a verse. Let me go check the chapter. Let me go see what I should do about this. Let me go consult with my priest or my pastor. right? What did he do? He sprang up and began walking. When God calls us, when God sees our faith, he will call us in that way and he will say, stand up on your feet. And hopefully we all have the courage to just jump up and do it, right? And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying in Lycaonian, the gods have come down to us in likeness of men. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Now, some translations say,
Jeez,
uh,
when will they learn?
yeah, right. Some translations say Jupiter and Romulus because they're the same gods, right? Zeus is the Greek version, Jupiter's or is it the other way around? Zeus is the Roman version, Jupiter's Greek. One or the other. One or the other. Hermes and Romulus are interchangeable. Uh, Barnabas
They're
is
fake gods
Zeus.
anyway.
Right, right. Zeus is the big stoic one, and Hermes is the messenger, right? So it kind of makes sense why they went with this way too, because Barnabas was probably just sitting there, standing there. That's from what we understand too, from some of the other history. Barnabas was a tall, muscular man, and Paul was not. But the other thing too to know that I learned studying for this chapter is that this city, Lycaonia, had a history, a mythology, and that Zeus and Hermes had visited this city once before. That this was a special place to them. That they liked this place. So this wasn't just like they weren't grasping at some random straw that they picked Zeus and Hermes because of this. It was like a fulfillment of something that they thought was supposed to happen. That Zeus and Hermes had returned to their city. Now, the other thing to point out too is they were saying in Lycaonian as opposed to speaking in Greek or any language that Paul and Barnabas probably understood because they didn't stop them immediately, right? It's a couple verses later that they find out what's going on and they come in and stop them. So the priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance to the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gate and wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard of it, they tore their garments and rushed out into the crowd, crying out, men, why are you doing these things? We are men, of like nature with you, and we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. Tearing of the garments, that's a very Jewish thing. That shows your extreme discomfort and displeasure at what is going on. They probably would have understood that. The crowds would have understood what that meant. And just, I love how he phrases it, right? You should turn from these vain things to a living God, right? All these other things that are done in vain, that are worthless, useless, right? They cannot save you. That is nothing that has ever been mentioned in any of the, other religions, that there's some sort of salvation for you that is freely given to you. And he goes into this now to go into a sermon about this. And it's interesting too, the parallels that you see here with Paul and with Peter, right? Peter heals a lame man right at the very, very beginning, right? Paul heals a lame man right before Peter goes in and preaches this amazing sermon, right? Um, there, Peter is in jail and Paul is later in jail, right? There's all kinds of parallels between their two journeys, but Peter was to the Jews and Paul is to the Gentiles. And Paul's sermon he's about to deliver here, since he knows he is not speaking to Jews, you'll notice he doesn't actually do Old Testament reference the way that Peter does or the way that Stephen did. He does it, he mentions some things and probably the broad general strokes that other people would understand about the Jewish religion, but he knows he's not speaking to men who, if you said, as Isaiah said, they wouldn't know, right? They would have no idea. That's not their religion. But he still is able to come up with an incredibly powerful sermon that speaks of what Christ offers to us, preaching the gospel without to a group and to a point where they understand it. So he moves on. In past generations, he allowed all the nations to walk in their own ways. Yet he did not leave himself without witness, for he did good by giving you rains from the heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. Even with these words, they scarcely restrain the people from offering sacrifice to them. Actually, I think his sermon comes later. Sorry, I remember the parts wrong. But he still points out to them that, again, God made everything. Yes, he allowed you to do your own thing. He allowed you to travel. He's not like the Greek gods that they knew of, right? If you offended Zeus, he'd just kill you, right? He'd smite you. There was no blessings without the God, you proving yourself to the gods in the Greek pantheon, in the God pantheon that these people knew. Whereas our God, the only God, he had a witness for them constantly. Again, providing all the things that they needed to survive and have good lives. Um, so it's numerous spots it speaks of how the creation speaks of God, how you can see God in the creation. But one thing, this was interesting, pointed out in the study I was listening to. There's one thing that creation cannot point you to, right? That's salvation. There's nothing in creation because creation is also cursed, just like we are right now. There is nothing in creation that will point you to your own salvation. You can find God there, but you will not understand the salvation that Jesus Christ offers there. That you have to come to the Word. That you have to come to God's Word. So, again, they were barely able to hold them back. But the Jews came from Antioch and Iconium, and having persuaded the crowds, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing that he was dead. Right. So apparently, wasn't enough people there in Lystra to get rid of the problem. So they had to Jews from other cities had to come and attack. Again, this is not the main Antioch. This is that close Antioch. Remember, there's two Antiochs. But when the disciples gathered about him, he rose up and entered the city. And on the next day, he went on with Barnabas to Derbe. Again, just bold, bold, bold. You just got stoned by the city, and they didn't immediately flee. He went back into the city. I mean, guess they thought he was dead, so he probably was all right. But he went back into that city, spent the night there, and then left the next day. I guess one other thing to point out here is that Timothy's from Lystra. He's a very young man at this point, from what we understand. But this is probably when it mentions in the letters to Timothy that his mother and his grandmother converted, probably here in this time. And who knows? Timothy might have even been there, might have even seen all this too, right? But then later, Timothy and Paul, have Paul adopts Timothy as one of his disciples, or as a disciple of Jesus, basically, not a disciple of Paul, but and later then puts him up as a leader in the church. So they move on. They flee to Derbe, which again, after being stoned that night, they then go on a 20 to 30 mile trek on to Derbe, right? So spend a couple weeks on the road. When they had preached the gospel to that city and had made many disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraging them to continue in the faith, and saying that through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. I'm sure they were all pretty like, why are you back here? Like, you almost died last time. They're trying to kill you. Why did you come back? And again, Paul preaching to them, letting them know that it's these will come. These tribulations will come for all of us who are attempting to enter the kingdom of God. And when they had appointed elders from them in every church, with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed. Right? And so these elders, this is pastors, right? When they appointed what we would call a pastor nowadays. So once they had figured out who was going to be the people to lead the church in each of these areas, and I'm sure it's not just those three cities, as I mentioned multiple times, right? And the surrounding areas. So there's a bunch of small towns and small areas. They were setting up churches all over, everywhere they went. But also, I don't know about your church. I don't know how every church does it, but one thing I haven't seen in even my own church is the fasting part. We get the prayer part down a lot, but the fasting, giving that bodily sacrifice when you're praying to the Lord to bless someone, to move someone, to bless a pastor, to bless a missionary, to bless anything. Fasting is really, really important, and I don't even do it enough. I've gone through fits and states where I've done lots of fasting. I was doing weekly fasting for a while. I'm not trying to say this to toot my own horn. I'm just saying this is something that I do believe is important to do. But I've also drifted in and out of it. Right? It's been like a month or two, and I haven't done that, and I need to get back to it. I really do. I'm talking to myself right now. All right. So on to Acts 14, verse 24. Then they passed through Pisidia and came to Pamphylia. And when they had spoken the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. And from there they sailed to Antioch, where they had been commended to the full grace of God for the work they had fulfilled. And when they had arrived and gathered the church together, they declared all that God had done with them, and how he had opened a door of faith to the Gentiles. And they remained no little time with the disciples. So this is back to the original Antioch, right? So this is now back all the way around, not the Antioch that was mentioned earlier. I know it can get a little bit confusing, but this is kind of he's they're rounding out that missionary journey and heading back to the basically the home base of the church going forward at this point. So they head back to Antioch again, tell the story of their missionary journey and how again how many Gentiles have been converted, and they remained a little time there. And that's again, this even there is years, right? Time is clipping by for Luke in this. He's um, doesn't really have I guess a point in spelling out exactly how long it is between each of these things. It doesn't really matter. Um, Another interesting thing that I heard discussed here is that one of the things we notice is that there is once we move to the Gentiles, right? Once we move to the salvation of the Gentiles, there's no longer a mention of how many were saved. Right in the beginning of Acts, it was 3,000 were saved, and another 2,000 were added, and this number was added, and that number was added. Right? It talked about the numbers being added. When it switches over to the Gentiles, the numbers aren't mentioned anymore. Now, I don't know why. I'm not exactly sure why, but I heard an interesting theory on this. And actually, it comes up, and we're going to take a sneak peek into Acts 15 here. Because I think it's in 15. Let's see here. Where does he say this? Let's see here. Where is it? This is when there's a lot going on here. I should have looked this up beforehand and found it, but I know it's in here in 15. Maybe swear it was in 15. It talks about when the fullness of the Gentiles is complete. Should just search for it. Oh, went too far here. See if I can find. I don't see it. I'm not seeing it. I should have searched it down beforehand. That's my bad. But there's a spot where it talks about Jesus' second coming will be when the fullness of the Gentiles is complete. There are some people, and I'm not saying this is true. This is some just extra biblical uh, uh, fantasy, if you will, but based upon some of the things that said in the Bible, is that there's a number when that number of Gentiles is reached, right? The ticker falls over and God says, "All right, that's it. That was the last one. Go get him," and sends Jesus back, right? Um, it's an interesting thought to look at. It's an interesting thing to think, especially because every time you see somebody profess their faith, could be the last one, right? Could be the very last one. That could be the one that sounds the trumpets, where God says, "Boom, that was the guy we were waiting for. That was the lady we were waiting for. We're ready to roll," and sends Jesus on back. Again, I wish I could remember where that is because I know it talks in there. It mentions that in here someplace. Um, I know 14 is kind of short, and I'd roll right into 15, but I'm not gonna because again we're gonna now jump over to James. So I guess this will be a little bit shorter of a Bible study today. Um, Normally we go for like almost a whole hour, but this was just a short little chapter, and I guess we can give everybody a little bit of break, right? We don't have to ramble on forever.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
some days we got a lot to do, and some days we got less to do. Um, and I will say, um, I also believe that fasting is important. Otherwise, why would Jesus mention it so many times?
hmm
And then also, why does it not say it in some versions of the Bible too? Um, I personally like to assume most of the time that when things are in most versions but not in some versions, somebody wanted that out of there for their own benefit. um, and that somebody's never somebody good. So
Mm-hmm.
keep that in mind. Um, and I don't know if I really talk about it on here at all, but every I just do every Thursday since we do the discipleship anyway. I feel like good enough day to also fast.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
then there's like it's not only good spiritually, but it's also good physically. So like there's
That's true.
lots of benefits for fasting.
Right. A
Um,
single day fast, even a 16-hour fast is good for you. Really good for you. You should do that
right.
often. A 24-hour fast is better. Then there's actually, and look this stuff up too. Isaac is not wrong. You can do some Googling on fasting and you'll see the different changes your body goes through at different time frames. Around the 48-hour fasting mark, it actually gets incredibly beneficial from you from like that 48 to 72-hour mark. Because your body switches into a mode where it stops trying to basically just process food and switches into almost like a clean out mode, where it starts to getting rid of old cells, destroying cancer cells, doing a bunch of things to clean your body and rejuvenate. And then even past that, there's additional benefits too. I definitely, yeah, I'm with you. I used to fast on. Typically I fast on Wednesdays. My wife and I will fast together on a Wednesday. Pragmatically decided because that's also the day that we take our daughter to church and they feed her dinner there, so we don't have to make dinner.
Oh,
So it kind
nice.
of makes sense to just say, hey, let's do it on this day because then we're not trying to make a meal for just one little kid. Um, so that works
Plus,
out pretty good.
cooking while fasting, like
Yeah,
watching other
fun.
people eat isn't even hard, right?
Nope.
Like, but cooking food and not eating it is
Yep. And then still having to
very,
be like, okay,
very
I'm going to
trying.
taste it. I got to make sure it's good, but then I can't, don't taste it a lot. Just get a little bit on your tongue just so you can make sure you didn't salt it too much or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you, man. I hear you. So yeah, but yeah, the 1 day fast is something that, again, we used to do weekly and we'll probably get back to it here. Just been a small break and, multiple day
Um,
fasts, don't do those all the time, right? Especially when you're talking like 3 day, 4 day, 5 day fasts. I don't think that's
you
something you should
want
be
to
doing
do,
monthly or anything like that, but
yeah,
definitely something you
not
should
even
probably do.
monthly.
Yeah, I was gonna say it seems like it's something that you should do once or twice a year, though. To just
Yeah.
and the point of it too, though, is you don't just fast and you don't complain about it while you're
Right.
fasting. You don't sit there and whine and moan to everybody. You actually don't want anybody to know, right? That's again the Bible spells that in a bunch of places too. Jesus specifically, thwaps the Pharisees on the head about it because they would not only would they fast, but then they'd put ash on their cheeks and their eyes to make themselves,
Yeah.
and so,
Look at me.
yep,
I'm so awesome.
look at
And
what I'm doing. Yep, look what I
yeah.
do for the Lord. Don't let anybody know about it. You don't need to. That's between you and God. And then the other part about that is if it's not fasting and prayer, right? There's no spot in the Bible where it says, oh, and they fasted, right? The
Yeah.
two are linked together always. So when you're fasting, the other piece to that puzzle is prayer. Lots of prayer. And that's one of the things that when I'm fasting, every time I'm like, oh, I'm tempted to eat. All right, Lord,
Pray.
means I need to pray to you. Not just about the helping remove the temptation to eat, but then pray about whatever else is going on, pray about whatever else comes to mind. Um, yeah, that's
Pray
it.
that they are actually trying to rebuild the third temple and they get it done next week. Things
Right,
like that.
right,
Um,
right. Exactly.
yeah, I'm not saying I hate this place, but you know,
Yeah.
if there's a
Can't wait to
better
see the
place,
next. I can't wait to see the
right?
next.
Like this place is pretty cool. You can only imagine what a better place would be. Uh,
That's right. I agree with you, man. I hear you. I hear you. Excellent. Well, yeah. So there, we added a little tiny bit more, a little bit about fasting. If you have more questions about it, just look it up. Just look into fasting. Read about it. Um,
or
you know,
comment, and we'll try to answer them to the best of
yeah,
our abilities.
for sure, for sure. So yeah, next week we're gonna do James on Tuesday, and I don't
He's a good
know
guy.
if we'll be able to get all the way through James. I might split James into two Tuesdays. We'll see. I'll kind of depends on how much in my study time you know, how much extra stuff I think I want to try to share along with it. But so we might do James for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll be back to Acts 15 after that. So, but then we've got Thursday again, discipleship. Join us for that. Is a excellent time of just kind of going through. the Word of God. And we're on session 9 or lesson 9, which is other Christians. Is what we're talking about in this. And if again, you can dive in at any point, but definitely make sure you go check out all the other ones. Watch the old playlist and get yourself caught up. And in each of the playlists, you'll see the links for the study guides if you want to follow along with those in each playlist. And I just don't share them all. It's just, you kind of got to grab them one at a time as we go through. So other than that, I can't think of anything else, Isaac, unless you got anything you want to add. I guess my name's Ray. I don't think I actually ever said that. This is Isaac. You're
Um,
listed too,
well,
speaking from the clouds.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't think you did actually.
No, no. Yeah. Isaac's back over there behind that cloud somewhere. That's why
Yep,
you can't. That's why you can't see him, but you can hear him.
that's where I hang out, right
Yep.
over yonder.
So thank you for joining us. I hope this short one gave you something to give you a little strength and to see that no matter what trials you face, no matter what tribulations. I mean, you could face stoning to death, right? Paul carried those scars of that stoning all the way through his life. He talks about it in his other letters. Um, I guess one other thing that I didn't mention that it now comes back to me, speaking of the stoning of Paul, there's actually some people, and again, this is argued both ways very eloquently, and so I don't care which way it lands or which way you land on it because it doesn't change a darn thing. There are some people who actually believe that he may have actually been killed. Instead of supposing he was dead, he may have been dead, and then God might have raised him back from the dead. Because there is a part later on that Paul writes in an interesting fashion about. I knew a man who was neither in the body nor out of the body. We couldn't tell. Basically, he's talking about it sounds like he's talking about an out of body experience that he had. And some people try to link that to this. Now, there's nothing, he does not say because he was stoned, he was in a body. It doesn't go into that. So they are kind of connecting some dots that there's no direct connection to. And so there's people who argue both sides of it. Again, miracle if he actually was dead and God raised him back up. Miracle if he didn't die from being stoned. Either way, miracle. So I'm not really worried about what's going on because stoning was very effective, incredibly effective, right? When you had a crowd stone someone to death, throwing big rocks at their head. Like I don't know if you've ever seen what they actually do to somebody too. They actually throw because they don't want to see you. They actually throw like a sheet over you. They cover you so you can't see the rocks coming either. And then they don't just hurl. It's not like little rocks. They hurl like the biggest rocks they can pick up and chuck them
Yep.
at your head. That's what they do.
And if you're
So,
lucky, one of the first few will knock you out.
right. If you're real lucky, you take a couple to the dome and down you go and you fall asleep, as it says in the other ones. So, they had done it for a long, long time and very, very effectively. And this is one of the only recorded times in the Bible that it didn't work, right? Like every other time it worked.
Yep.
So, just an interesting thing to point out there, too. All right, I'm all over the place with this, but I think we're good. Thank you again for joining us. Leave us a comment. Share the podcast with somebody else. Share the Bible study with somebody else. Toss it around and let us know what you think. Leave us some comments. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I hope God blesses all of your days, and
Yep.
we see you next Thursday.
See you Thursday.
Oh, that's the wrong button.
Wrong lever.
Why is it doing that? There we go.